Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of The Future Human. I'm James B. Barbieri, your regular host for this series, and I'm here to help you throughout the call. So any issues, just let me know in the chat. Just a very quick reminder to make sure your microphone is muted. The chat is open to everyone, so feel free to share your thoughts and ideas with the rest of the group. And of course, this session is recorded for archival purposes and for you all. So today we are honored to be joined by Edi Bilimoria, who has organized and chaired conferences with the aim to encourage the cross-fertilization of ideas in the fields of science, religion, and practical philosophy. He worked as education manager at the Theosophical Society in Australia, developing courses and study papers, researching, lecturing, and organizing international conferences, as well as supervising the research library, National Media Library, National Members Lending Library, and the development of the website. His books include The Snake and the Rope and Unfolding Consciousness, both awarded the book prize by the Scientific and Medical Network. For many years, Edi was a board director at Scientific and Medical Network and now serves as a trustee of this organization and in an advisory capacity to both the board and Scientific and Medical Network's Galileo Commission, a project set up to find ways to expand science and open up public discourse on the subject. Edi is also a trustee and council member of the Francis Bacon Society. Today, he will be in conversation with Alex Gómez-Marín. Welcome both.
Thank you, James, as always.
Thank you.
Hello, Edi. It's really an honor to have you. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And well, for the audience, this is not a book promotion conversation because we're going to talk about, but Edi has written these 4 volumes, Unfolding Consciousness. They're beautiful and heavy, right? So here they are. Going through them lately, and we have this saying in Spanish, we say, one should not compare, but you know, you all know probably Ian McGilchrist. Well, Edi Bilimoria's Unfolding Consciousness feels to me like the esoteric wisdom counterpart of The Matter with Things. And it is about perennial philosophy and about consciousness. And so straight away, I wanted to begin by reflecting on, you've spent 2 decades at least writing the book, not to say reading and thinking and even practicing about those things. This book has more than 2,000 references. Well, what is perennial philosophy and why it matters today?
Thank you, Alex, for a wonderful introduction. You really got to the heart of the matter. You mentioned Ian McGilchrist as a sort of counterbalance, a counterpart. And only recently, I had a short article published in Caduceus showing the parallels between Ian's approach and the perennial philosophy, showing how neuroscience and philosophy approach the subject of, well, the divided brain, and how the perennial philosophy talks about the divided mind. And I'm glad to say Ian was very happy with my reference to his material. When you say, what is the perennial philosophy? Albert Schweitzer likened the word perennialism to a tree that always bears fruit, but never the same type of fruit. So, for example, an apple tree will always give you apples, but never the same kind of apple. Each apple is different, which means that the philosophy, which is eternal, beyond space and time, has always to be cast in the idiom and the language of the times we live in. So since we live in a scientific age, we have to express that wisdom in the language of science. One can express it in the language of art and music, of course. But it means that we are always replenishing the same wisdom with new ideas.
When you say express in the language of science, and I think I know what you mean by it, but doesn't it feel like well, not a betrayal, but if it is a kind of an eternal wisdom, it's a philosophy, now to kind of invite it, or you could say force it into the structure of science, isn't something lost in the way? How can this be done? How can we take those, let's say, those fruits from this tree and now just put them in the mold of science? And of course, we should say also what's meant by science. And science is what scientists make at a particular time as well. And there are many types of scientists. But anyways, it struck me that you express it like, well, now it is the time to the context that we have, the vessel that we have for this perennial philosophy, for this apple juice, is science. How does that work?
You alluded to it very well, Alex, when you said how do you force it into the mold of science. Of course, by science, I don't mean purely materialistic science, which certainly has its place. But if I can just leave you with a beautiful quotation from one of the, let's say, the sages and adepts, that between religious superstition and even more brutal scientific materialism, the white dove of truth hardly knows where to place her weary, unwelcome foot. So by science, we mean the approach of science, inquiring, asking questions, looking for evidence. We don't mean the almost religion of scientific materialism, whereby anything that is not made of physical matter, cannot be proven materialistically, quantitatively, is either pseudoscience or total rubbish. By science, there is a science of everything. There is a science of love. There is a science of yoga. There is a science of everything. It is a methodology and an approach. So we need really three things. We need philosophy, religion, and science. Philosophy provides the grand plan. Religion shows you your path up that mountain, and science provides the means and the methodology for that ascent. So putting it another way, philosophy provides the ethical basis, religion the moral basis, and science the efficient basis. So I'm not restricting science, of course, to materialistic science. And let me say that materialistic science is indispensable in its proper place.
Yes.
But it's not the ultimate of science.
Well, that already puts many things on the table. Let's see. I'm very excited. Let's see if we can cover them steadily, but also calmly. You mentioned religion, and nowadays people prefer to say spirituality because it seems that it provokes less allergic reactions. I'm perfectly comfortable with the word religion. And I actually was going to ask you later on, but since you brought it up, about the interplay between religion and what people, at least in Spain, associates with. It's like, well, this particular monotheistic dogma that was imposed about that. So I guess we need to restore the meaning of many words here. What do we mean by science? What do we mean by philosophy? What do we mean by religion?
And what we mean by human.
Yes.
I think definitions are arbitrary. You can define things whichever way you like, and every definition depends on something else which you need to define. But the etymology of a term is very significant because the etymology has grown out of the consciousness of the race and the culture. What does religion mean? Religare, to bind back. Now, what are you binding back? You're binding back the mortal, temporal, personal self to the immortal, eternal self, which expresses through the mortal vehicle. Ligare, like ligature, something you tie. You can do two things with a ligature. The vast majority, I'm afraid, of it is to hang yourself. You can use a rope to hang yourself. You can use a rope to tie someone up. But you can use a rope as a lifeline, something to help you to ascend. So in that sense, true religion has the same flavor as yoga, which is from yuj, which means yoke. What are you yoking? Union. You're yoking the temporal, personal, mortal self to the immortal self. And it is a tragedy that the greatest of scientists, and I make a big play of that in these volumes, were deeply religious and expressed it in their own way. The prime example is the great Isaac Newton. But the great scientists of the quantum era, obviously Einstein, Pauli, Max Planck, they all talked of the sense of the sacred, where science, their science, was a projection from higher realms. So in that sense, science is vital, because by studying the below, we understand the above, as above, so below.
Now, using the analogy of the rope, it occurs to me that there's a third thing we can do with it. And that's something that academics are really great, which is to make a complicated knot and then be surprised that the knot is there and then say, well, my job is going to be to untie the knot. And this seems to be what's happening with consciousness studies. It's like, we can't explain it, but it's because we've made certain assumptions. It's like we've made these knots, and now our task is going to be to pretend to unknot it. And maybe that's a segue into connecting perennial philosophy into consciousness, which is a big word together with unfolding. I'll get to that later. But the relation, you think consciousness is the particular, well, I don't dare to call it a topic, but it's where science and perennial philosophy meet today in this so-called problem.
Yes, they meet, and the deeper and higher you take them, the more they merge.
So what's the knot? What's the knot of consciousness? And how can we turn this rope into something to ascend rather than to play knots?
The knot is created by firstly trying to define that which is ineffable, but we'll come to that. But the knot is trying to understand things purely through the intellectual mind, without realizing that we have to go beyond the intellectual mind, the conceptual mind, and the mind that likes to work in mental models. Now, just talking of definitions, you know, when you talk of consciousness, people naturally say, well, how do you define it? Well, look, let's put it this way, Alex. I'm going to ask you to make a journey from where you are speaking in Spain, yes, to my bungalow in Godalming near London. Now, you're taking a night flight, so you're flying over London, looking at the beautiful tapestry, and there's no more beautiful city than London by night, because it's a garland of jewels from plus infinity to minus infinity. Now, can you define your journey, or will you describe your journey? Or even more, will you describe the experience of that journey? So because you can't define it, it in no way militates against the fact of experience. And as I said earlier, a definition relies on something else you have to define. And as Gödel showed quite clearly, you cannot, in a formal structure, come to an absolute understanding. You have to break out of it. So the more one puts the emphasis on experience rather than definition for this sort of conversation, the more helpful will be our inquiry. One can use words like awareness and feeling and all the other things associated with our subjective nature. But all of them come under this umbrella term we use, consciousness, to be aware at different levels.
Now, there's a beautiful tension, I think, between the adjective perennial philosophy or perennial wisdom and the adjective unfolding consciousness. Well, maybe you have it as a gerund that's conveying an action, but there's something to be there, eternal, unchanging. But then consciousness is unfolding. Tell us more about what's going on? Maybe it's an evolutionary perspective. There seems to be an arc here happening.
Yes, there is always the movement from being to becoming, being and becoming, the noun and the verb. In David Bohm's wonderful terms, the implicate and the explicate. That which is implicate is concentrated. It wants to explode, so to speak, because there is a tremendous internal tension, a potentiality. So what is unfolding, it's well, literally unwrapping of the same energy matter principle in various phase states of itself through the various kingdoms of nature. And it's a cyclical process, not circular, and forever happening, from being to becoming at different levels.
Now, without further warm-up comes the cosmological, theological question: what for? Why this unfolding, or better,
Why
what
is it-
for? Yeah.
Why? Because love likes to express itself, put it that way. If creation at any level is an act of love, then you can't love a baby or a child or a human being or an animal or anything else without expressing that love in some sort of way. So, you know, as Schiller put it so beautifully, the universe is a thought of the deity. And since that thought has spilled over, overspilled into matter, we would say, it is the task of every thinking person to try and understand that original design. What for? In order to know yourself at every possible level, to express or to go from potentiality to potency to actuality.
Which is one of the core starting points of your book, the famous Know Thyself.
Yes, yes.
So in that respect, going back to perennial philosophy, sometimes it's easier to grasp what something is by comparing it to what it is not.
It is not.
What kind of philosophy? It's not perennial philosophy. Isn't all philosophy perennial in a way, or at least making the
I see what
effort?
you're saying. Yeah, if one can see a point of origin that one can relate to all the great world cultures and religions, what's not perennial is something that's totally sectarian. And something that's just for me and my country and my this and my that, and you know, to hell with all the others. Fundamentalist ideas are totally non-perennial, if you like. If you, I mentioned perennialism as the tree that produces fruit. If you leave the fruit without attending to it, it turns rotten. And that rotten fruit is what's not perennial. The tree will hopefully never produce the same rotten fruit if you attend to its roots.
Yeah. As opposed to contrasting perennial with pluralistic or with context, which is not the case, right? Because here, the unity that perennial seems to imply is respectful. Not only respectful, it's thriving with plurality and diversity. What I'm trying to say is that your attempt, or perennial philosophy per se, as I understand it, it's not the exercise of just squeezing an essence by disregarding the constitutive aspect of context, or even like the fact that they're indigenous knowledge, which means that belongs to this place and not that other place.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Alex. And I can see you've read the volumes in some detail from the question you're asking. No, it's not a question of putting the fruit in a sort of thing you use to squeeze juice out of a lemon, and this is it, and then ignore the rest. One helpful concept is that of from E.O. Wilson of consilience. which is the putting together of independent or semi-independent pieces of evidence such that they build up to a strong body of evidence. And here the individual pieces of evidence is to show that the sciences and the philosophies and religions of all the great cultures can be taken back to their source and shown to come from one pool of wisdom, and that one pool then fertilized or fecundated all the various streams. And as the streams flow down the hill, they pick up the coloring of the various soil. But if you take that coloring back to where they came from, it came from that one pool.
Yeah. Now let me jump more concrete into how that perennial philosophy expresses itself, and you've written many pages about that. And I want to pay attention again to the adjectives, because one reads in the book, and even as title of chapters and even sections, the words occult, occult science, or esoteric wisdom, or subtle bodies. These adjectives to me were spooky maybe 10 years ago. Now I feel more and more comfortable with them. But I think it's useful if you could explicate,
Yeah, sure, definitely.
explicate what esoteric here means, which is perhaps an impossibility, because but it has to do with, yeah, well, you let us know.
Yes, most certainly. Firstly, just taking one step back, and no one's pretending that the perennial philosophy has the answer to all the problems of all the ages, but it's like a general algebraic formula where if you put in the right parameters, you always get the answer. But the algebraic formula is the complete statement of generalities, but you make it specific with individual parameters and putting it in simple terms, of course. So the perennial philosophy doesn't provide the answers to all ages, but by a suitable training of the mind and the person, it provides the intelligent response to the problems of any age. So, for example, if you are driving on a rough and rocky road, you can't possibly anticipate every pothole, every stone, every roadblock, but by virtue of your driving skills, you can negotiate these difficulties intelligently. So substitute driving skills for understanding of the perennial wisdom. Now, esoteric, it is really, the word means the key, the inner influences behind the outer manifestation. Noumena means to breathe out. Phenomena means to breathe out. Noumena is what is being breathed out. So the esoteric philosophy and sciences deal with the hidden influences that present themselves in terms of outward effects. Occult goes a step further. It's not only understanding these hidden influences, but being able to control and work with them. So using a musical analogy, and it's a shame I couldn't play the piano to you today. The mystic, say, is the individual who has a great feeling for music. But then he doesn't just want to listen and be reduced to tears. He wants to understand the music. He learns about composition. He starts to play an instrument and understand music in greater depth. So you can regard that as the esoteric. It's the next step. Now, the occultist is the one who can really perform on his instrument. So the difference between esoteric and occult is the difference between system and function. So all of these words have a very broad spectrum of meaning. Yeah. And it's a great shame that occult, creates this stupid hysterical smirk from people when they think it's witchcraft and all that sort of rubbish. Occult science deals with nature's invisible and hidden forces. For that reason, one's ethical and moral character has to be absolutely spotless. That is why the training in the mystery schools, whether in Egypt or India or North and South America or Greece, place the greatest emphasis on testing the moral and ethical character of the candidate before these secrets were revealed.
You're anticipating a big question that I had, which is, on the one hand, there's the notion of something hidden or invisible. But that's, if you think about, for instance, what physicists do, well, that's the business of physics, to kind of make visible what's invisible. And a famous physicist recently said, well, it's good enough we can explain 5%, alluding to dark energy and dark matter, right?
Yeah.
But then there's another sense where, well, these things are not just hidden, but they sound kind of secret, which adds a little bit more to the plot of the whole esoteric business, if I can put it this way. But now you are answering that precisely. So you're making this jump from, if you want, the content of what those forces are and how to play them out in the world with the ethics. So tell us more about this hidden side of things, which comes as old as Heraclitus and these aphorisms that nature loves to hide. But at the same time, it's not just that nature loves to hide, it's like this perennial philosophy. Let me phrase it in a question. Does it have to be kept hidden from certain people? It sounds very undemocratic in that sense. It's like, well, the teacher will tell you those secrets. How does that work?
Right. It is only hidden from those who would abuse it. What is sacred is secret. It's not hidden because you want to be, you want to hide something. It's not mystical because you want to be, throw a cloud over someone. In the great literature, Rosicrucian and the Indian, they work through what is known as blinds, B-L-I-N-D-S. In other words that have a meaning to those who understand, but are meaningless for those who don't. And that is how the sacredness is protected. And of course, the skeptics will say a load of rubbish. It's a load of rubbish to them, not to those who have the key. So what is hidden is what is secret, and what is secret is what is sacred. But what you're hiding is dimensions of space and time, if I can put it that way. So let's take, let's take my musical diary. I do believe in paper diaries. If you have a creature who can only work in one dimension, he can, or she, creature, can work along just the side and fall off. In 2 dimensions, he can explore the area. In 3 dimensions, explore the solidity. But there's more. In 4 and 5 dimensions, such a creature will not just understand the literal words, but the hidden meaning behind the words. In the same way as a musician spends all his life trying to understand the hidden message in one bar of music, let alone a whole concerto. The notes provide a hidden and a sacred space which can only be discovered by exploring and working on them.
In this partnership,
I've talked of dimensions of being, and I think the greatest promise from science, and science has such promise if only we obeyed the best of science, string theory and M theory that openly point to other higher dimensions, 13 or 11. Another way of looking at what's hidden is latent powers. We are in the middle of Wimbledon. he who won the championship, it was hidden in him as a baby, if I can put it that way. Obviously, he didn't play at Wimbledon as a baby, but what that bud, that potential was hidden, and it flowered into manifestation. Similarly, there are faculties of the human being, when we understand what we mean by human, that in the course of time or in the course of personal self-development will flower into latency, from latency into actuality. I think the lighting is a little low. Shall I turn my light on?
I see you well. I think it's okay.
Okay, yeah. Well,
Yes.
it might just help if I turn this on. But carry on, Alex, I can hear you.
I was exactly going to ask you about the latent powers, because one thing is to speak about certain knowledge that's hidden, while you want to put it to use. But here the interpretation is not the usual one, the technological one. Okay, we'll build devices. It's no. Here the human being is the instrument. You use the word vehicle, I think, at the beginning.
Yeah, the active vehicle, yeah.
And again, that sounds terribly promising and at the same time a little bit spooky, right? These latent powers, and also reminds me of the human potential movement and what it promised and what it delivered and what it didn't deliver. What are those powers?
Well, look, let's draw inspiration from the world around us. How is it that Mozart was caught by his father Leopold composing a harpsichord concerto at the age of 4, I believe, and he told his dad, it's very difficult, you have to practice it, you know. How is it that Newton, born to a farming family, no intellectual capability, achieved such phenomenal results in not only science, but religion, theology, alchemy, all of that? How is it that Ramanujan, the great Indian, who died at the age of 32, with no mathematical training, was invited by Hardy to Trinity College, Cambridge, was a fellow of Trinity and a fellow of the Royal Society. What about the insights of William Blake, T.S. Eliot? So here we can draw inspiration from phenomenal capability from those who had no obvious nature or nurture background, no obvious one. But now we can talk about the other faculties of consciousness known as the siddhis. They're all faculties of consciousness. For example, anima, the ability to be very small, mahima, the opposite, to be the ability to be very big, prapti, to reach anywhere, vasistva, to command and control anything. And this anima faculty was explored gloriously in that book, Occult Chemistry, which was poo-pooed, of course, in the 1930s, which is increasingly drawing attention thanks to the wonderful researches of Stephen Phillips, for example, who has shown that what was investigated purely clairvoyantly, for example, seeing quarks and seeing subatomic particles well before they were discovered in physics, this can be correlated to the latest findings in physics and in quantum physics. So these are faculties of consciousness that are latent. Clairvoyance, obviously we have vision, but I would say, Alex, it's just come to me that that wonderful research you've been involved in, EOV, extra-auricular vision, where people blind can be shown to see, if I can put it that way. Is that fair enough?
Yes.
That must be some sort of a flowering of something latent within the individual.
Yes, indeed. And it sounds impossible. It sounds unbelievable.
Yeah.
And yet, what if it was true? So now this consciousness of neuroscience, I flip it around. right? Rather than the neuroscience of consciousness, we can speak about the consciousness of neuroscience. And the way you express this in the book was also shocking to me, because in an age, let me preface it, in an age where for perhaps for the right reasons, we are against us. It's like, you know, the Anthropocene, anthropomorphic, anthropocentrism, all of those sound like insults. And then you write kind of in capital letters, even man is the measure of all things,
Yes.
right? Help us unpack that, because and who cares what the popular media thinks, but it's like, wait, no, that's precisely the problem. But to you, that's the core of the solution.
Yes, man is the nature of all things, because all the powers and forces that have gone into making the cosmos have made not only the human being, but also the human body. And I've included an example of that, of the as above, so below principle, talking of cosmic birth and human birth. So, I mean, it's an extended table, but for example, the human birth starts with a seed, the terrestrial embryo starts with the seed, but the seed contains the future potential of the man, like the acorn, the oak. The mathematical point called the cosmic seed, the monad of Leibniz, contains the potential of the whole universe. So the sidereal content of the ether, represented in occult and Kabbalistic mysteries by the elementals, and in physical astronomy by meteors and all kinds of cosmic bodies, can be correlated to the umbilical vesicle in the baby embryo, serving, as science teaches, to nourish the embryo organically and originally. And one can go on like that. The outer crust of every sidereal body, and of our earth, of every animal and human being, can be likened to the globular object called the blastodermic vesicle, which is, in embryonic terms, the outer and inner layers of the membrane, which go to form the physical man. So the Hermetic axiom is absolutely vital in this. And no one's making a stupid literal comparison between human birth and cosmic birth, of course. We're talking of principles behind the same process.
Now, these principles, I think you argue, allow us to reform the nature of humans. Well, this is of total interest to this series, the future human, right?
Yeah.
Not only the future scientist, which was last year's, and how that would change the scientists themselves, right? As being their own, so much investment in technology. Well, their bodies, their minds, probably other technology that needs to be upgraded.
Right.
And can you say more about this reformation of man's nature? It sounds like an impossibility. How are we even gonna? It's not just some cosmetic changes. It's a reformation of our own nature.
Yeah, it's our own nature being in constitution. Right. The future human, at the moment, there seems to be, to my mind, this completely irreconcilable dichotomy between the atheist, materialist, transhumanist view of the post-human, enhanced by technology and genetics, on the other hand, the spiritual perspective of the perennial philosophy and wisdom of all religions and cultures. So humanity is definitely, in my view, at a very critical juncture, even a bifurcation in human development and evolution. So the Silicon Valley, of course, and World Economic Forum view of the human being is entirely mechanistic. We are complex biological machines, and our biological software can be enhanced genetically using chips and manipulated. And we are, as Yuval Harari puts it, we are hackable animals. So the take-home message, and it's always important not to get depressed by the details. What they're saying, the philosophy behind it, is that all life is the product of matter, physical matter, and its interactions, and evolution is regarded as the enhancement of mechanistic attributes through technological development. And the goal of the future post-human being, human, is ever increasing intelligence, or as they see it, intelligence is cognitive abilities. Now, the spiritual and transpersonal view of the human being and everything else, well, let's just talk with the human, is really an immortal spirit spark, call it divine consciousness, clothed and embodied in a mortal vesture. So evolution is regarded as spirit or consciousness seeking ever newer and better forms through the cyclical shedding of the outworn and old forms in order to express its limitless potentiality. We shed our entire body in 7 years, I believe. The body renews itself, all the cells. We express through that new vehicle. The plant drops its withered flowers so that new flowers can grow. The plant is there. So the attainment of the fully realized human being in the spiritual tradition is truth as love and wisdom. And this is the transcendent message, a huge difference between brutal intellect and love, or truth as love and wisdom. So I regard the emphasis on that intellect without soul, without feeling, as an extremely dangerous and retrograde step.
Yes.
Allied to soul and wisdom, it's absolutely wonderful. Sorry, yeah.
No, I mean, in expressing these crossroads, this bifurcation between transhumanism and perhaps we could call it transpersonal, just to start with the same prefix. But anyways, you could see that as a bifurcation that's progressively going to increase, or you can attempt to imagine at least a possible reconciliation. Because in a way, perhaps both attempts are ways to divinize matter from an esoteric point of view and maybe from an exoteric point of view. But there's also the possibility, and that's something I've wanted to ask at some point to other of my guests, but often the moment is not right to ask that question, but maybe I can ask it to you. Or we speciate, or because we're used to having just one species around of human beings, right? But from the perennial philosophy point of view, is it conceivable? Is it possible? Is it even likely that while the transhumanists may continue their own way as a human species, and let me say we, if I'm deserve that other route, at least we're trying, and the others, well, we go our own route as another species.
You are pointing to a very sharp bifurcation.
Yes.
Yeah. It is my hope and wish that the transhumanists will run out of steam, if I can put it that way, when they realize that the other side of what they're advocating, and you can't get away from it, is cryonics, freezing the body in liquid nitrogen. And as of 3 years ago, if you paid a premium of £300,000, you could have a full body freezing, or if you paid 150,000, you can have just your nervous system frozen, whatever. And some people, like Ted Williams, the American baseball star, have decided to separately freeze the head and body. It is my hope that there will be a sufficient enlightened scientists who point out that when you unfreeze the creature and try and join the head and body together, however advanced your science, you will not have a future human being or even the past human being. And as we speak, there are academic papers that confidently predict when immortality will occur. 2100 probably, and 2600 definitely. And for that, we need massive AI. We need power coming from Dyson spheres. So at some stage, I think people will realize, if I can put it this way, that the heart of every speck of matter is spirit. I'm using the word in a general sense. The heart of every microspeck of matter is spirit, eternal and immortal. And any system, any country, any totalitarian state based on its denial will ultimately fail.
Which brings us to the beginning of consciousness as being fundamental, right? And also the varieties, the more vanilla way of putting it and the more in the strong sense, which I think is the one you're using, because now we hear, after being presented with the two alternative forced choice between dualism and the only other option, physicalism or materialism, now we have other isms, right?
Yeah,
and
lots of isms.
Now, some of those isms try to kind of have their cake and eat it, right? Because they try to say, well, matter is still fundamental, but consciousness is a fundamental property of matter. But you're saying something more, right? In your unfolding consciousness, this primacy, this ontological primacy of consciousness.
I am saying, Alex, that consciousness is not a property of matter. Rather, consciousness expresses as matter. Consciousness expresses as matter. So if you take the example of H2O, H2O expresses as ice, as water, as steam.
Yeah.
But it is the same H2O. And you have the beautiful, the sooner scientists take refuge and inspiration from the poets, the more they will be on their path. And the great scientists have done that. That, you know, the lovely saying of the Kabbalistic saying of Rumi, I slept in the stone, I stirred in the plant, I dreamt in the animal, I woke in the man. What's the I? It's this, it's consciousness unfolding through the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the human kingdom. So it's very important to see humanity as a kingdom of nature, as a phase state of nature. Rumi again put it so beautifully, dying for the sake of life, shedding the outer clothes so that you can put on new clothes. All life expresses through forms that must die.
And you use the word odyssey, and you say this is not only an intellectual, but also a spiritual odyssey.
Yeah.
I think this is very important, right? Because it's not about reading more, being more clever, talking more about it.
No.
It's really an inner work, and it's hard, and it has to be sustained. So, and that's the future human and the future scientists, as I understand them.
It is an inner work. It is joyfully hard. And silence is the prime quality that I certainly yearn for in this busy world we live in. But we have it in our power. I've never had a television. I don't intend to have one. Just one example of not having distractions. Can I, if I may, just come round to this word man? Because the other, I'm not going to use the word nonsense, but you've heard the word, we hear around is this gender warfare that's going on now, where our whole being, our whole humanity is completely reduced, not only to the physical body, but as one guru put it, to an identification with our reproductive organs. Now, man as I've explained in the volumes very carefully, has nothing to do with gender. And a man is not the same as human being, not the same. Because the word man, what's the, again, definitions are arbitrary. The etymology of the word man, it derives from the Proto-Indo-European mind, to think. So it is cognate with manos in Sanskrit. So man means the thinker, applying to all genders, both genders. So in the esoteric philosophy, we see a sharp distinction, man written small m and capital M. Man, capital M, refers to what the Kabbalists would say, Adam Kadmon, who is prototype man, the prototype of humanity, archetypal man, the paradigm of humanity. And man with a small m is the projection or reflection of that archetypal heavenly man into our world of matter. And that's why man stands in evolutionary terms as an entity expressing a central principle of consciousness that's unfolding from one phase state to another. And that's why he embodies all the powers and forces in the cosmos.
Yes, thank you for this
The man has
clarification.
nothing to do with male, female, transgender, or anything to do with that. Now, very quickly, human is not quite the same as man. Like homo, person, human in Latin is related to earth. Satish Kumar reminds us in his talk that we are polluting the very soil of our being, humus, earth. So the word human puts the emphasis on our earthly being, but man puts the emphasis on the evolving divine spark expressing through the human being.
Now, in wrapping this up, you use another expression, and here we're learning again how to use terms in a different way and very, very deep, I would say. You use this expression that I think I read in Alice Bailey and this esoteric literature, the universal brotherhood of humanity. I mean, it's really lovely to read those expressions. It was lovely 20 years ago, but especially today, it's not just lovely, it's urgent.
It's very, very urgent.
So I wanted to end with your reflections on this brotherhood of humanity.
Well, of course, brotherhood is the old-fashioned term. It's nothing to do with non-sisterhood. I mean, brothers means all men and women. I mean, I think we can agree on that. I think it's the central, most important point. When the Theosophical Society was founded, it was made very clear that the idea was not just to divulge occult wisdom, which would be very dangerous without first formulating a nucleus of the brotherhood of humanity. Because only when we are brothers and friends will whatever is divulged be used ethically and wisely and altruistically. So even though we see ghastly conflicts now in the world, at rock bottom, I think, if we take it to their logical conclusion, there is only unity, which science has shown so beautifully in quantum physics. Now, if only the wisdom of science could be upgraded to a more ethical wisdom. So my dream would be never, of course, to knock science, but to raise science to a higher metaphysics, to realize that the brotherhood of atoms and entanglement that it talks about can be applied to humanity as a whole. And it doesn't mean uniformity. It's nothing to do with uniformity. It's recognizing infinite diversity in that unity, infinite colors from the white light, infinite overtones from the one musical sound.
Yes, and this expresses another very interesting and very important tension, at least for me, which is that this perennial philosophy seems to be practiced in isolation, in silence, but without a group, without the others. It seems impossible that it comes into fruition. So the brotherhood here provides kind of this really human net where
The
we
cohesion.
can do those things. Yes.
The cohesion and the framework. Yes, yes.
Yes. Now, are you optimistic as to the unfolding of consciousness and perennial philosophy?
I remember the great Daniel Barenboim was asked that question, not regard to the perennial philosophy, but the future of humanity. And I can only say how right he was in saying short-term pessimism, long-term optimism.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really do feel that there are higher forces. I don't want to make it sound there's God up there doing things, but there are higher influences that are moving humanity in the right direction. And very, very quickly, the perennial philosophy talks about root races, which has nothing to do with racial types and all that sort of thing. But a recent, contemporary sage who talked about being optimistic was Peter Dunov, who David Lorimer resonates with very strongly. He's written a lovely book, Prophet of Our Time, I think. And Peter Dunov said, we are crossing the boundary now between two epochs. So we are in this liminal or transitional stage, approaching what's known as the sixth root race, where there will be faculties and qualities that are only latent, but which will come into fruition. And spiritually wise people will then inform the sixth race. And Peter Dunov, I remember Einstein in David's book, there's a quotation from Einstein saying that everyone takes me seriously, or words to that effect, but I take Master Peter Dunov seriously.
Yes.
So there is room for optimism, but the other thing they say, most certainly, a heck of a lot of destruction, unfortunately, as the old form has got to be pared away. And the old form means the old concepts, of course.
And you wouldn't have written these books, I suppose, if you weren't thinking that there's work to do. And you've put a lot of energy, let me say, to the audience.
My goodness, Alex, there is tremendous work to do. I barely stepped on a pebble. There is tremendous work to do, but it's so important that each person works in a way that inspires them without knocking someone else, working in brotherhood and friendship.
Yes. And I was going to add that the books are beautifully edited. There are all these summaries, there are all these clear and well thought images and schemes. There are these, it's a very personal style with these summaries and keywords on the margins. There is a pedagogical effort there, which I really value, because you could just say, well, go and read, and we should, one of those 2,000 references, go and read Blavatsky or whoever, and we should. But the exposition, so that it reaches, that this esoteric wisdom reaches as many people as possible.
Thank you for that, Alex.
It's really welcome.
And talking of the writing in a scientific age, if you make a statement, you provide a reference and you say who said it, where, which page, and that's the scientific way. So it's not just my opinion. I can state my opinion about it, but I provide references, hence over 2,000 references.
Yes. Well, Eddie, so I think we reached our time and we can open it up for comment and question from the audience. Thank
Yeah,
you very
we-
much.
Delighted. Thank you, Alex.
Well,
I'm very honored, and I never take such meetings for granted. I'm very honored and humbled by being invited.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both. And again, yes, thank you, Eddie, for accepting the invitation and for the beautiful imagery that you give to explain your concepts. It's been really interesting to listen to you, to both of you.
I can't see you talking. Oh, right. Okay, I can now.
On the top.
Let's
So we can, yes, open it up
gallery.
to everyone now for
Mhm.
Q&A. As always, you can use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen to ask your question. Otherwise, if you feel more comfortable, you can always ask your question in the chat and I can read it out for you. The only thing I would say is just to give space to as many questions as possible. If you could just put questions just to the point, and if you have any follow-up, we can always circle back to you. Yeah, so who would like to go first?
Well, while people raise their hand, I will. Yes. Oh, no. Okay. Alan is here. Please go ahead, Alan.
Oh, Alex, thank you. Eddie, thank you. My question is about knowledge, and I'm not quite sure how to frame it. I started off by sort of asking what is the difference between information and knowledge.
Mm.
But then sort of following on from that, my thought was, is knowledge something an individual can store away? Or is it something that a prepared high-level person can access? But again, if it's being accessed, that suggests that it's stored somewhere. So really, my question is, what is knowledge?
Definitely not data. But that which comes out of using data. But it doesn't even have to start with data. In the scientific sense, if you want to find out about the properties of light or gravity, you start with experiments which generate data. But if you just have a load of numbers, that's not going to be knowledge. So you will work on it and then you will see what lies behind it. But knowledge can also come from experience, gnosis, wisdom. But knowledge for me goes far beyond mere intellect, which is the brain machinery. It is the individual, when faced with a phenomena or data, intelligently using that for the practical need of the moment. Now I see you've got a lot of books behind you. Talking of stored somewhere or whatever, I can do no better than just read to you what Erwin Laszlo, the great scientist and concert pianist as well, of course, how he defines akasha. Very briefly, akasha, meaning ether in Sanskrit, or radiation, is the first and most fundamental of the five elements, and the others being, akasha embraces the properties of all five elements. It is the womb from which everything we perceive with our senses. The Akashic record, so-called, is the enduring record of all that happens and has ever happened in the whole universe. So what I'm getting at is the brain and other faculties is a way of accessing, it's a transducer. It's not an archive, it's not a repository, it's a transducer of that infinite store.
That's beautiful, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
Alan. June, you have your physical hand up. Please come in.
Yeah, that's nice.
I just received a book from a dear friend who had written the book, the title of which is Hermetic Philosophy and Creative Alchemy, the Emerald Tablet, the Corpus Hermeticum, and the Journey Through the Seven Spheres. My friend's name is Marlene Seven Bremner. And the timing of this particular presentation couldn't have been better.
Oh,
It
thank
was
you, June.
very
That's
enlightening. It gave, I thought to myself, how am I going to get into this heavy stuff? And you have helped me, Edi. You have
Thank you.
helped me greatly. And I am so excited about the journey that I'm about to take.
That's wonderful to hear, June. The journey never stops. That's very important. One always approaches an ever receding endpoint. But you mentioned the Emerald Tablet. That's music to my ears. In volume 1, I have a large table showing the translations of the Emerald Tablet, one of which is by the great Isaac Newton. And I wish scientists would see that this legendary great man, his wonderful ideas came from his appreciation of the Hermetic axiom. When he wanted to understand things on earth, he looked to the heavens. So there is a translation by the great Newton in volume 1 of the Hermetic axiom, the Emerald Tablet.
Wow.
It's not just saying, sorry, it's not just saying as above, so below, that's obviously popularizing it, but it goes into how the above and the below are related. And one of the last sayings is nothing is above, nothing is below in the divine economy. So one thing we've just got to get to grips with is deep truths are always imparted through paradox. To take it literally is to make a nonsense. In my beautiful piano, you haven't seen it, have you? Let me show it to you. Can you see that?
Yes.
That's my beautiful Steinway piano. Now, the overall instrument is more important than a little spring on the end of one key. But if even one spring were to fail, the music would be flawed. So as above, so below, but nothing is below, nothing is above in the divine economy of the whole music, so to speak. Everything plays its part.
Yes, let me just add, thank you, Edi, because all of this, in a way, and I'll speak for myself, we've heard about it, but it's become so cliche. I don't know if it's on purpose or not. So cliche that we don't even pay attention. It's like, well, yes, the usual kind of new age way of speaking about the universe. Okay, let's move to something serious. But what transpires from today and your book is that this is really serious. This is not just phrases we casually drop. And it takes time to just contemplate them and see what they're really saying. In the same way that if you think about physics and you think about the least action principle, well, it's something just to meditate on. It's very deep.
I would like to add a comment.
Yeah.
My friend just, well, not just, but in the just the recent past, she finished 2 years in the mystery schools.
Wonderful.
Yes, and it was, I've been waiting for an opportunity to carry on a conversation with her. I'm not sure that I'm ready to do that. I think it will be mostly her speaking to me in whatever form that will be.
Which mystery school, June? Which culture? Greek, Egyptian, Indian?
Do you know? I think it was Greek.
Good. Yes.
But I'm not. It's not Indian, but it's Greek. I'm pretty sure.
That's about the safest.
Yeah. But this is often I have to miss this part of the Parley presentations, and I thought to myself, no, there's something that's going to happen to give me a gateway and I wouldn't say it's a hunch. It's an inner knowing.
That's
And
wonderful.
thank you so much. This is so incredibly important to me.
Thank you.
It is, June. Thank you. And what is so incredibly important is the nature of thought, or the importance of thought, and understanding that everything starts with thought. And people keep going on about why is there so much evil and all the rest of it. Well, examine your thoughts, examine the collective thinking. Whether you build a channel tunnel or you build an aeroplane or anything, it starts with a vision. And that vision then generates a process, a management structure around it. But with vision and management, you don't have a product. You then have to have materials to conform to that template. So the material then embodies the vision of the person who dreamt it in the first place. So in that rather very simplistic sense, because I work in a channel tunnel, every brick and particle that went into the construction of the tunnel, so to speak, embodies and encapsulates the vision that brought the tunnel into being in the first place. Because it was there at that time, it wasn't someone else's tunnel.
Thank you, June, for coming in.
Blessings.
Thank you. I can see that Rob has his hand up. Would you like to come in?
Sorry, who is this? I'd just like to see.
Hello, Edi. Alex, thanks for the talk today. Appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, see you. Go on.
So a few things that came to mind. I mean, number one is, you referred to the fact that there's a tremendous amount of work to be done. So what exactly do you mean by that?
Oh, gosh. What I mean is doing whatever one does best in one's own life to bring an enlightened approach and an increasing in goodwill in one's contact, in one's neighborhood, in one's dealings. That sounds a bit of a general statement. Being a bit more specific, there is wonderful literature, wonderful science, wonderful music that one could use as a means to that sort of enlightenment. One can explain calmly the path that we are taking, which, if not checked, can only lead in one direction.
Mm-hmm.
One can also explain and describe the importance of balance. The balance varies, but we're not castigating any approach. We're saying each has its context. So from my perspective, the further work in this incarnation is really trying to get a deeper understanding of the law of karma. If only people would understand karma, they would think twice before doing some of the ghastly things they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that is one tremendous bit of work, just to get people to understand karma, to get people to understand evolution, that one's the soul of man has infinite potential and potentiality.
So thank you. I guess I read the bio, and you had some, or still do have some involvement with the Theosophical Society, so you must be quite familiar with Krishnamurti's work, I guess.
Most certainly. I was very inspired to hear Krishnamurti many times in England. Well, yes, I've known the Theosophical Society for half a century. And let me, in the same breath, say that Theosophy never was the invention of Blavatsky or others. It was just a vehicle whereby the ancient teachings that were scattered far and wide across epochs and times could be brought together in a comprehensive body of knowledge and related to science. I cannot emphasize this too strongly. Theosophy is not an invention of anyone. It is really the putting together of the eternal wisdom in a comprehensible manner for the age we live in. Therefore, it has no doctrine as such, thou shalt believe this, you shouldn't do that. It puts the emphasis totally on the person to do their own work, find their own path. Here is the landscape. You choose your path, because truth is a pathless land, as Krishnamurti put it so beautifully.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it seems to me that given that we're, you know, as individuals, we compose the society that we live in, the society shapes us and we shape the society.
We are a mirror of society. Yes, it's a two-way mirror.
A two-way mirror. Yeah. So the work has to, I gather, you know, I mean, it has to involve the individual understanding his influence on society. And I think what you're saying with karma, really, isn't it just being incredibly aware of where you're coming from in any action that you put forth into the world?
Yes. And the motive, not just the action, but the motive. Motive is far more important in this sense than results.
Right.
Because results can be, with the best intentions, okay, not the result, but if your motive is pure and altruistic, that's quite different from, you know, it's not any means to an end, or the end justifies the means, you know, these.
Yeah, it's like the seed, you know, the seed unfolds out of the motive and then goes out into the world and has whatever effect it has. And if there's no awareness of the motive, then it creates what's going on right now, you know, just blindness, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate
no, thank you, Rob.
Thank you for coming in. Next, let's go to Pam.
Hi, Pam.
Hi. Oh, this has been, I really want to echo what June said. It's been a really fantastic conversation. And I also agree it's extraordinarily important that it's coming at this time. I'm quite overwhelmed by this because it's been very emotional to hear esotericism spoken about. Many, many years ago, I had put myself on this journey, and it came through Gurdjieff and Ouspensky's teaching. Now, I learned everything from books. I did not join any groups or anything else because I didn't want to, frankly. It took me a long time. But I will be brief because I know, Alex, this is coming to the end of your session. But the journey began when I wanted to understand what it was to be a human on Earth. And I'm a painter, but I had been a musician, and it's taken me on the most wonderful journey. I came into quantum physics through it. I don't know how. I have no background in any of this stuff. I'm a painter. And all my work has been to try as sincerely as possible to grasp what this means. So I'll cut to the chase here, because now I think I know what it means. And Bohm's implicate-explicate order has been of the greatest importance to me. It really opened up a vision which showed a lot of what I was beginning to understand. So, Eddie, I will now tell you my conclusion, and you can tell me if I'm completely mad or not. I think, and I agree, that we're made of the stuff of the universe, no doubt about that in my mind, and there has never been. I think we are, or can be, the cells of the earth. The earth is living, we live on it, we belong to it in totally, we are it, in other words. And maybe you could expand that idea even into the universe, because it's all the same now. And I really hesitate to speak about this to anybody, but I feel, having heard what you're saying, it's the first possibility I've had to express my gratitude for esotericism, the journey I put myself on, and where it's still going. And this is a terrifically important time, because there's a balance to be held between what is happening on the one hand, as you said, and what might happen on the other. And I hope the center will hold. And I feel that there is a reciprocity which is needed on behalf of all of us, really.
Reciprocity and goodwill are so important, Pam. Thank you for that.
Thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you, Alex.
You use the word cell, the human body. Each cell participates in the life of the body. So each lesser life lives within the orbit and the sphere of the greater life. Why shouldn't each human being be a cell in the body of humanity? Indeed, each human being is a cell, and just as we have more important cells than less important cells, the leaders of the human race are the more important cells in the body of humanity. I mean, in music, Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin, Schubert, Einstein, science, obviously. So since you mentioned this, I didn't want to earlier because it's so easy to be misunderstood. But there was a lovely saying in the secret teaching of all ages, that grains of sand are in the process of becoming human in consciousness, but not necessarily in form. And human creatures are in the process of becoming planets becoming solar systems, and so on, ad infinitum. It's not saying a grain of sand by virtue of materialistic technologies to grow up and become a human being. You know, that's sort of the nonsense that can come out of this. It is saying that there is an evolution of kingdoms of nature, and we are all cells in that grand evolutionary scheme. So thank you for raising that so beautifully.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I feel better now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
As we started a little later, are we happy to take maybe one more question?
Well, you can take as many as you like, James. I'm all yours.
For time constraints, we'll do maybe one more. And this one comes from the chat from Kirby, who asks, please share your insight into consciousness, kasha, light, breath, and spirit as terms applied to the subjectivity-objectivity dialectic.
Very nice conversation.
It's a nice short question. Consciousness, light, akasha, breath. The important word is breath, the breathing out. I'll bring another word in, Brahma, from the word bri, to breathe out. Atma, inspire. So all of these terms have a commonality of meaning, where there is really an unfolding and a movement from the center to the circumference, and light is a manifestation of that movement.
Well, thank you.
Is there anything you'd like to say about the journey from subjectivity to objectivity, as those terms imply that we move from an utterly subjective experience of the world to a more objective one?
We need both, Kirby, depending on the circumstances. The emphasis in science, of course, in neuroscience, is on the objective. The brain is regarded as the outer doorway of the mansion. You know, in my father's house are many mansions, that lovely saying. The brain is the organ that provides the the doorway to the outer external objective world, but within that mansion, there are internal doors where there is a constant flow and doors opening and closing. So one certainly can't be dogmatic about it. In one's personal life, there are situations that demand one or other approach, but anything that is understood more deeply, what you understand becomes more objective in the sense that it's not a feeling nature that buzzes around, but you can see it and handle it and discipline it, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Would you repeat one more time, please, what you said about light? It was such a beautifully conclusive statement.
So I said light is the outer symbol, the symbol, the manifestation of intelligence. So in the tree of life, you have Ein Sof and Ein Sof Ur. Ein is the darkness, the completely subjective, as you use, the subjective state. Ein Sof is that subjectivity that wakens up, and Ein Sof Ur is light, is the radiation from that awakening. Just as each one of us in the morning, deep sleep, awakening, activity. It's so important always to see one process in all its manifestations. We sleep, Ein, we wake up, we stir, Ein Sof, and we act, Ein Sof Ur, the radiation, the light.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in for your question. So we are unfortunately reaching the end of this session. So as always, I would like to come back to you two and see if you have any final words to conclude this session.
Yes, could I make one point? We applaud science sincerely. I would not have my eyesight, and I mean that, were it not for ophthalmology. It was a serious situation when I was 14 years old, and contact lenses saved it. In those days, they used Gillette blades for operation. I avoided surgery. Thank you, science. But now, science is exploring the outer universe. It wants to go to Mars, it wants to go all over. Science now needs to explore the inner universe, the universe of mind. Because if it doesn't do that, we blow ourselves up. So the only bomb-proof shelter, real bomb-proof shelter, is an understanding of mind, the inner space. Good, you've gone to outer space. Now go to the inner space. So as the great Paul Brunton said, we have to spatialize mind and mentalize space. Explore mind, not just brain. You've done enough brain work.
Right.
Thank you, Eddie. And in your words, I see constantly these coincidence of opposites, how the inner and the outer can coexist, how the simplicity of the teachings of perennial philosophy do not negate, but affirm this tremendous richness, by the way, that we haven't touched, but it's reflected in the book. All the many traditions and flavors, it's overwhelming. So this unity and diversity coexisting. And then one more thought is that, as you know, the motto of the Paris Center, we borrow it from Carlo Levi, and it says the future has an ancient heart. Well, perennial philosophy seems to be the limit case, right? Because this ancient heart is this eternal wisdom. And so it's so appropriate to this series that we had this conversation. I'm super grateful.
Thank you, Alex, so much. As in Rupert Sheldrake's terms, the presence of the past. Yeah.
Indeed.
Well, thank you so much,
Thank
both.
You, Alex. Yeah.
There's so many.
Thank you. And next time we'll get the microphone sorted out. I can play the piano to you.
Yes, they don't know, but we had planned to listen because Eddie is a professional pianist, and we had planned to have some music at the beginning, but we had some technical glitches. We couldn't do it.
Sorry, Alex, just correct. I'm not a professional, just in case. That's my aspiration. So you were right there. That's my aspiration. It's only latent. But thank you so much for that.
Thank you. There's so many kind and loving words about this presentation in the chat. So really, thank you so much both. And of course, thank you to everyone who came today and listened and asked your questions or contributed in your own way. Before we go, I just have a quick reminder that this Sunday we will be starting our new summer series, which is Beyond Bohm, Part 1, Changing Meaning and Changing Being. On Sunday, we will have a roundtable discussion with Alex, Lee Nico, and Hester Reeve on Bohm, Bergson, Whitehead, Life as Movement. And on Monday, we have invited Rupert Sheldrake with his presentation, Is the Sun Conscious? So I hope to see you then. If not, we have plenty more coming up on our website. If in the meantime you want to get in touch, you can use the website or on social media or email. Eleanor@paracenter.com is the best place to email. Until then, thank you again both, and we'll see you again soon here at the Paracenter.